So thank you, Jeffrey. We are here today with Jeffrey Witt. My name is Nicolás Lazaro. I'm making this interview for the IPM Digital Humanities section. And Jeffrey is a specialist in high and late medieval philosophy and theology, and he's also a well-known specialist in digital humanities. So thank you, Jeffrey, for being with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Nice to be here.
And thank you for accepting this proposal. So let me ask you, Jeffrey, how should we start in this digital humanities curriculum or scholarly specialization? How did you start it?
Yeah, thanks. Well, I think my interest started sort of organically with like a specific goal in mind that I wanted to achieve. And then I think I was really looking around for the tools to help me achieve that goal. So I was working on a medieval manuscript and kind of trying to emulate or replicate some of the things I've seen in critical editions. And I was just frustrated at the limitations of putting all my work into Microsoft Word. I felt like the data I was creating was really highly ambiguous, really fraught to being lost if things got moved around, or the visual look on the Word page got moved too much, and I was interested in creating a double apparatus or multiple apparati where I could put sources and variants and things like that. So Word wasn't really very useful for that, and then I learned about the Textual Encoding Initiative, which is or TEI, which is a larger group of text scholars that try to create standards and rules around semantic encoding. And so one of the first kind of light bulbs for me was just recognizing this separation, or the possibility of separating the data I was creating from how it was presented. So if you think about what we do in a Word document, a lot of times is we use visual cues to tell ourselves or the reader the status of different text parts, or the function of text. So if we say this text functions as a footnote, we make it tiny, and put it at the bottom of the page. This text functions as a header, we make it bigger, we surround it by white space. This text functions as a paragraph, we indent it or something like that. So we're beyond just the text, we're creating all kinds of paratext or metadata that tell us about the text and tell us about how texts relate to each other. And again, Word captures that. When we do visual encoding, it captures that in a really precarious way. So I was really excited to learn about ways of capturing all that data in a semantic or an explicit way, to explicitly say what things were. I felt like I could be a lot more precise. I could be more and kind of things would be less fragile. But when you separate data from visualization, then you quickly realize that if I want to present this to someone, I have to be able to manipulate the data that I've created. So that requires learning some machine instruction. So that's how I got started. I separated the data from how it was going to look, and I put it into XML, a structured data format. And then I realized, like, I can't show it to anyone unless I learn how to manipulate it and to present it. And so it was just kind of a long series of steps, just slowly teaching myself how to write code to manipulate the data so that I could present it in various ways. And one of the advantages of separating the data presentation is now I can present that same data in 10, 20 different ways, depending on research interests. Whereas before, all I had was the Word document. And so that's creating that separation at first was difficult, but it's opened up a lot of new possibilities. So that's kind of how I got started.
So you said you started teaching yourself Did you attend
Yep.
to some boot camp, code camp, something like this? Did you have digital humanities?
Not really. We didn't have any digital humanities support at my graduate school at Boston College. No one really was doing anything like that. But I had a couple people that were like kind of doing that, and I was just interested and curious. So I just started. I started with smallest projects, and there's lots of online tutorials that will kind of. You have to Google around for a little while to find something at your level. But once you do, there's lots of help to kind of make little projects. But I do think it takes a lot of patience and endurance, because in order to learn, I had to build projects, the result of which wasn't very impressive to people, right? But I think I kept at it because I was genuinely curious about how the tools worked and wanted to understand it for myself. Whereas if you were just kind of like, I just want the end result, you probably wouldn't have the patience to, build and rebuild a project multiple times. I've kind of done something in a certain way and then realized like I could do it a better way, so I redo it. I've done it over, and each of those iterations, I acquired new skills and new abilities. I've been to Digital Humanities Summer Institute a couple of times. That's in Victoria, Canada. So they're like little week-long classes, or sometimes I see workshops advertised, and I might submit a paper to an application to come. So I've had a few of those. I've taken lots of online classes. Once I got to a certain level, then like identify like clear classes around different skills, and I would just take the class. But having your own project to constantly come back to, I think, has been the biggest driver, because all the classes are going to give you exercises and tutorials, and it's easy to follow instructions, but once you have to apply that to something that's not in the tutorial but is your own thing, that's where you get stuck, and that's where you have to problem solve, and I think that's where the biggest learning gains are. So yeah, that's how I proceeded.
So from your experience, if you have to recommend somebody, for example, I already do have my project, my driver. So which skills or which tools would you recommend to somebody to start learning? Or it just depends on the project? We can some general idea, for example, skills, tools.
Well, I mean, it depends on the project you're interested in and the outcomes that you're interested in, I think. In the humanities, I feel like a lot of people's work is text-based. So text, but I mean, other people might be interested in images and other things like that. But let's say your project is heavily text-based. I think that, a deep understanding of what it means to structure data, and to create structured data that's divorced from presentation is really important. One of the most common technologies for that is XML, but that's not the only one. But definitely there's a lot of support in the digital humanities space for that kind of work. So knowing how to put data into an XML structure is really important. And then TEI, the Textual Encoding Initiative, is one flavor of XML that a lot of people in the humanities world know and use. So it's really useful to be able to kind of open up an XML file like that and know how to navigate it, know how to read it, and so on. And then if that's going to be your data structure, then some languages that would allow you to manipulate that. So at a basic level, XSLT, these are like languages really designed to manipulate XML data. XSLT, XPath, XQuery, those are important. But those are just like examples of the more general skill, which is the ability to manipulate data. So it might not just be XML, understanding all data structures like JSON, YAML, all those structures, and then having some coding language that you feel pretty proficient in which allows you to manipulate that data. So besides the XML programming languages, I would probably do Node or JavaScript, Python, and maybe Ruby if you like that language. But you need some tool that can take in your structured data and change it into a new format. So I don't know if that's specific enough for.
Yes, of course, because I'm not a specialist. I always say that, but where I understand is digital humanities are like a bundle of tools will help you to develop and to communicate better your research, your own research. So first of all, you should have an research interest to apply the tools.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your outcome. So like if your outcome you want is kind of like text publication, you want to present the text. Well, you're probably going to want to do that on the web or as a PDF. So then some facility with JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks, like that's probably pretty important. If your interest is in analyzing a text, but you're not really working on publishing the text or presenting it, then a programming language that's designed to kind of do data science, where you might analyze the text and then create charts and graphs based on different patterns and stuff that you find in the text, then a language like Python or R is probably what most people use. So some facility, if I was looking for classes to take, I would probably take Python for the data scientists, something like that.
So talking about this project, what could you say, or how would you present the Scholastic Commentaries and text archives?
What do we do? What's our main mission? Yeah. Well, the goal of the SCTA is to, in a way, create a kind of data publication provider that's divorced from publishing presentations. So a way to aggregate and bring together texts, medieval philosophical texts that have been created as explicitly as textual data rather than a document or a presentation. And so we usually kind of think of the SCTA as having kind of three goals. Is one, to be a standards group to define how you should prepare your scholastic data so that it can be aggregated and combined to connect to other texts that other people are making. Then the SCTA tries to also be the aggregator of that data. So we don't need the text to be in any one location. It can be distributed. People can create it anywhere. But once it's created in a certain way and sort of announced in a certain way, we can crawl that data and create connections. So if you're working on Cajetan and I'm working on, Johannes Capriolas or something, right? It could be the case that they're both focusing on, well, let's say it's something more diverse, like I'm working on canon law and you're working on Cajetan or something. They could both be citing a very specific passage in Thomas Aquinas. And it might be very interesting to, for me as a canon lawyer or a historian of canon law, to learn that this particular passage is not only important to my canon law text, but was highly discussed in a field that I don't know very much about, let's say, 15th century theology text. You similarly let's say you don't know very much about canon law or the canon law tradition. You're working on your Cajetan text and are focused on this citation of Aquinas. It might be important to your work to realize that this phrase that Aquinas says not only was it important to Cajetan, but was used a lot in canon law. right now, we don't really have a good way for either one of those researchers to be aware of the work that the other person has done, right? It's kind of like very slow, and you sort of have to discover it by reading the work of other people, browsing their footnotes, and then kind of accidentally stumbling along this. But the fact is that when we create our editions, for example, our apparatus Fontium, the sources, and we each of us notes, oh, this quote is from Thomas Aquinas. We've actually created enough data to create a reverse index and make this joint, so to speak, where in Thomas Aquinas, where the canon, law text, and Cajetan come together, to make that known and available to both people. What we can do is crawl both people's texts without each other knowing about each other, and then reverse the citations, and then say, when we come to Aquinas, we could say, I've been cited by Cajetan, and I've been cited by this text in canon law. Or conversely, I could come to the quotation of Aquinas and Cajetan and then say, show me everybody else who's cited this quotation of Thomas Aquinas. And then I could filter it. Show me that in biblical commentaries. Show me that in canon law texts. Show me that only in the 15th century. So we're interested in creating standards so that people can create textual data, to then aggregate that data, and then to really publish the results of that aggregation so that it can be used. So you can view the corpus on the web. You can view the corpus in the PDF. You could view graphs about the corpus. You could view these kinds of statistics, or we could create a global corpus index kind of automatically. A lot of all that work that people are used to doing manually can really happen automatically, but only if we create our data according to a common field standard. So that's the large part what we try to do.
Thank you very much. Just two questions to finish. First, which is your current project? What are you working now with? And the second is, what book or chapters or bibliography, literature would you recommend to somebody who wants to get in this digital humanities world?
Yeah, well, a lot of my work right now is really continuing to build the SCTA, improving our aggregators, improving our data standards, and then to show people the power and the potential. We just need a lot of data. So a lot of my work is just textual editing, making lots of additions, making lots of text. We try to use machine learning models as much as we can to extract text from early printed books. But that requires a lot of structuring post extraction, linking that to images. So I'm working on a few of my own editions. I'm working kind of en masse on creating rough and ready editions so that we can connect things. But a big part of the SCTA is to kind of partner with specific projects working on specific texts, maybe ones that get grant funded. We get listed on those grants as a kind of contributing partner. Grant projects then kind of contribute, become members and contribute funds to the SCTA as a subvention. And then I work with each of those grant projects to create their data in the right way, to improve it, and then I work on aggregating and producing visualizations that are useful for those teams. So I've been working on a text by Peter Plau for 12 years, working on a text, publishing the data for an edition by an Augustine and Peter Gracchus, and then I'm working on lots of little people in between to fill in the details. And then two groups I'm working with right now are a group in Geneva on Reformation, so Protestant scholasticism, and another group in Canada working on medieval Florilegia, and a few others, but those are the main ones. As far as literature, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of good articles online of just understanding what structured data is. There's some the TEI organization has a couple good articles on like a gentle introduction to XML. So if I was like trying to get into the nuts and bolts of that, I would definitely read an article like that. If I was more interested in kind of abstract theory, there's a good article I liked by Patrick Zala. It's a German article, but I did make a translation at one point. But I liked the article. I thought the article was really good because it really emphasized this idea of separating content and or data and presentation. It talked about or it circled around this idea that the binary that we sometimes hear people talking about between print and a digital edition, this is a false binary that I think really comes from not understanding the separation of content and data, right? Because if you're really separating data from presentation, then you can have both a digital version and a print version. They're not mutually exclusive. They're only mutually exclusive if we store our data in a particular presentation. If it's in that presentation, well, then it's very hard to move it to another. But if you're separating them, then this binary between digital and non-digital edition is really a meaningless concept, and I don't think it's helpful to the field to talk about things that way. So that article, I can find the title, but it was by Patrick Zala, and that was particularly good. Even deeper theory, I think, things like Marshall McLuhan, talking about the medium as the message, understanding how the medium shapes consciousness, the way we think. It's really important. And there's some, earliest, the other person I might think about is Ted Nelson. Ted Nelson wrote some really interesting, it's kind of like the father of the hyperlink. He wrote some really futuristic books in the early 70s about hyperlinking and creating connections across texts. It's really interesting to see someone write about that idea long before the internet and long before the web or HTML or anything like that. So those are great texts when you're really thinking about the abstract idea and not necessarily about its implementation. So
Jeffrey, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.